Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this virtual professional development opportunity. My name is Joe Schmidt. I'm the Social Studies Specialist for the Maine Department of Education. Today, our session is Teaching the 2020 Election with iCivics, and I'm happy to have joining us today Emma Humphries, the Chief Education Officer for iCivics, and as she said, the cool version of a CEO, which I think is fantastic. Many of you know, and I always like to give the full disclosure, that I've served on the iCivics Teacher Advisory Board, which has had many iterations since 2014. And I'm happy to have done a lot of work with them. I'm very proud of the work there and the resources they have. And in no way, shape, or form is this an endorsement of iCivics, but rather just bringing an expert to the table in Dr. Emma Humphries. I will turn it over to her.
Thanks, Joe. Calling me an expert is quite generous, but I'll take it. So let's just go ahead and dive right in. I want to give this topic sort of its due before just like talking about the how to teach it and what to teach, all those things. So I'd like to start with this image here, which is sort of a TV screenshot of a 1980 presidential debate between incumbent Jimmy Carter and his challenger Ronald Reagan, whom, as we all know, would go on to sort of categorically defeat Carter and become the president of the United States. But I show this to sort of make a point about how much has changed. So imagine it were 1980. Imagine it were what is today, October 13th, 1980. Would you ever question for even 1 second that a social studies teacher should be teaching about the election? And as social studies teachers, would you even hesitate? Would you be like, ooh, I got to really think this out and maybe talk to the principal? And the answer is no. Like, it would be assumed that you were teaching the election. In fact, if your principal or superintendent or a parent found out that you weren't teaching about the presidential election, they would think something was wrong. Like, you're the social studies teacher. It's a presidential election year. Of course you're teaching it. So, what has changed? Why are we now 30 something years later, 40 years later, I'm really bad at math, not teaching a presidential election or hesitating or questioning it? What's changed? And so, a big change is that I've been born since 1980, not long after. Instructional technology has sure come a long way, the TV to the smart board. But more than anything, what has changed, what is our political culture. It has become increasingly fraught, downright toxic, hyper-partisan, hyper-polarized. And what used to just be a sort of political issue has now become a full-fledged controversial topic. Elections they're political competitions, so they've always been contentious, but now they're just straight up controversial, which is really problematic for teachers. And I know I'm preaching to the choir, and the fact that you're here means that you care about this topic and you think it's part of your job to teach this topic. And I want to be very clear and not equivocate that it's 100% a social studies teacher's job to teach about an election, particularly during a presidential election year. But then, in the next breath, I have to acknowledge just how difficult it is to do that. How today teaching about this election feels like teaching about gun control or abortion. It feels like just a full-blown controversial topic. And there's some good news and bad news with that. But we'll get to that in a second. To offer just sort of the big talking point, and it's just something that's sort of easy to remember, and it doesn't roll off the tongue, but it's just easy to remember that youth who were taught about the election and voting were 40% more likely to vote when they turn 18. So that's a huge, significant impact on likelihood of voting. 40%, you would do a lot of things if you thought there would be a 40% increase in likelihood that a good outcome would happen. So the fact that youth are 40% more likely to vote in a presidential election if they're taught about elections and voting means that we have to teach about elections and voting. It is our job. It is malpractice not to do it. We absolutely have to do it. But again, it feels like a controversial issue. It feels unsafe. And I want to acknowledge that. The good news is that teaching controversial issues is a best practice. We know as social studies teachers, it's something we should do. If our main job is to prepare our young people to be informed, knowledgeable, skilled citizens in our democratic republic, then we have to offer them safe classroom structured opportunities to deliberate, to learn how to be citizens. And what is more important to citizenhood than knowing how to talk to people, especially across difference. So that's sort of the good news, is that we have this rationale. This figure, I just keep it up just long enough so you can sort of internalize it. 40% more likely. Kids are 40% more likely to vote when they turn 18 if they were taught about elections and voting. That's just huge. It means we have to do it. But again, I understand why we don't want to do it. And here's sort of the problem. So teachers, I don't have to convince you that it's important to teach about the election. It's important to teach about controversial issues. It's important to cultivate an open classroom environment where students can have these discussions in a safe place. And if teachers feel that they have support in that, they're likely to do it. Unfortunately, as these numbers show, a lot of teachers don't feel that support. All these numbers are below 50%. I don't know what that translates in terms. I'm not doing the research. We're a curriculum provider. We create resources, but we know that the numbers are just too low, and that teachers are not perceiving support at the school level, from school leadership, at the district level, and I think most importantly, at the parental level. So just want to take the time to, before I go into my rah, let's teach about the election, hey, I see you, I know how hard this is. In terms of sort of my suggestions is, you guys are master educators, so you're going to lean into your instinct, and it comes down to communication. It comes down to letting your principals know, your administrators know, letting the parents know. So I like to talk about when I was a teacher. I was in a community, teaching in a community that was demographically and politically very much unlike the community in which I was raised. So I was raised in a really progressive part of South Florida, and I taught high school in a very conservative, semi-rural county in Florida. And so I went from, having social studies teachers in my childhood who absolutely talked about these issues and shared their political beliefs, which tended to be more progressive, to teaching in a conservative community where I knew those liberal views wouldn't be so welcome. So every open house, I talked to the parents about, what my agenda was, which was, I didn't care what your kids think. I just care that they do think, and that they know how to think, and they know how to think like a historian and a political scientist. And sent home letters like, hey, we're going to start talking about these issues. Just want to make you aware what my goals are, when it's going to happen. I was fortunate. I never had a family opt out. I never had a problem. And I think it's because I took that time, because I did feel vulnerable, being that I came from such a different community, politically speaking. So that communication is key. Hashtag 2020, you guys add in the layer of the pandemic. If you're teaching either virtually or in a hybrid situation, you are so acutely aware that you have a bigger audience now, that you're not just talking to the bodies in the room or the bodies on the screen, but perhaps bodies like a floor further back in another room who can overhear it. I was presenting to a group of middle school students out in California back in March. So really soon after their campuses closed, maybe it was April, talking about the census, which felt sort of politically innocuous. And the kid asked a really good question about whether or not the citizenship exam would be included. And so very quickly, the conversation became more political. And as I'm about to offer what I hope was a balanced, nuanced, nonpartisan response, I see this adult figure walk past one of the screens. And at that point, I thought, oh my God, it's not just me and the teacher who invited me and her students. It's anyone else who's in these homes who can hear what's happening on the screen. And I felt this sort of duty to the teacher to not put her in a bad situation. So I had to play it so safe. And I know I was I stumbled a bit, but all of that is to say solidarity. I know how hard this is. And I guess all the more reason for us to communicate with parents and administrators ahead of time. So with that, I'm going to sort of jump into what I hope is a little bit more of the fun stuff. I'm going to skip a slide here real quickly. So most of what I'm going to show you today, probably all of it, you can be found in one place. So I know most of you know about iCivics. I hope you use iCivics. I hope you appreciate, that's not the right word. Not that I hope you appreciate it. I hope that it's helpful, and that if there's something that we're not offering that you need, that you let us know. The best compliment we've ever received as an organization came from Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor, who sits on our board, and she said that iCivics is an organization that listens, and so we take that very seriously. We respond to all support queue questions, all emails. And so I hope that we're providing what you need. And if we're not, let us know. That said, in this environment, I know it's sort of hard to know what you need other than more planning time and like maybe a full day to catch up on sleep. So with that, we're really trying hard to make everything just sort of as convenient and as accessible as possible. So we built our election headquarters where you can find just about anything we have related to teaching about the election. We refresh it daily. It's kind of like one-stop shopping election hub from us. So with that, if you've heard me speak before about iCivics, you've heard me say this. We're known for our games. We were founded by Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor. She, at the advice of the father of educational gaming, James G., decided to make games. And so we're really known for that. The games put us on the map, but we have so many more resources than that. In fact, I should probably update the slide. We're easily over 275 resources now, pushing towards 60. But as for our games, that's cool. Come for the games, but stay for all those other resources, which now includes our Tough and Timely Infographic series and our Student Power Elections Guide. So I'm going to focus on these two things just a little bit since they're sort of new, but then of course we'll talk about other resources as well. So with that, I always like to just let people know how to navigate to what I'm talking about. And again, feel free to have your browsers pulled up and to be sort of following along. Or hey, it's Amazon Prime Day. If you're multitasking, no judgment from me. I was definitely doing that during a conference call this morning. So you go to iCivics.org, you can click on election headquarters and that'll bring you to that URL I just showed you, or you can click on teach because hey, you're a teacher. So let's click on teach. That'll bring us to this page where you can search by standard or by content. For this, I'm gonna do a content search and I'm gonna type in the word infographic here in that search bar just to make these infographics a lot easier to find. And when you do that, you will be brought to a page that has all of our infographics listed. They're not all related to the election, but a few of them are. So I wanted to include them here. So you'll see, I'm just sort of shifting through here, all of our different infographics. So let me just tell you really quickly about the ones we have. We have Plug into Power, which is about the US Census. We have Trial and Appeal, which is all about the US court system, which is super complicated. Campaign Cash, so this is related to the presidential election where candidates get their money and all that jazz. We have an infographic on women's suffrage in honor of the centennial of the 19th Amendment. We made this one, Impeachment and Conviction. We weren't planning to make an infographic on impeachment, and then it became a very timely topic back in the fall. So we quickly worked to put this out to create, just really, right to the facts, nonpartisan resource and teaching tool. We just published this one about a week ago, gerrymandering. Again, related in a sort of circuitous way to the election, all these things related to the census, of course. I want to make a point about infographics really quickly, just to let folks know about sort of how iCivics is evolving as an organization. And I hope this is interesting and hopefully it's helpful for your practice as well. So, we have a very strict nonpartisan mission. We hold ourselves very accountable to that and we will never stray from it. But over time, we found that we can't necessarily or always be apolitical, especially where the fight for justice is concerned. And so what I like to say to people is that we are not apolitical, but we are nonpartisan. We'll never promote a candidate or a party plank, but we are pro-democracy. And so we are going to be supportive of things like voting and fair representation. And when issues of power are at play and maybe aren't as cut and dry as they're presented in the average textbook, we're going to try to identify those in a balanced and accessible way for students. This is a new sort of direction for us, and we're still working to find our footing. And I know we're not going to get it right every time, but we sure are going to try really hard to get it right. And when we're wrong, we're going to admit it, which we've already done, and make those corrections. But going back to that women's suffrage infographic, we were really proud of it. It's a beautiful infographic. We published it, designed it and published it in February, which was in the before times, if you will. We shared it over the summer during like the day that was like sort of commemorating the centennial. And we got a lot of pushback from folks saying like, hey, you're presenting this as all women could vote after this was passed, and that just wasn't the case. And I was like, man, we messed up. I mean, missed opportunity here to highlight that, yes, the 19th Amendment in word granted the suffrage, granted the franchise to all women, but we know, particularly in the South, which is my home, that that wasn't the case for women of color, that Jim Crow laws made it practically impossible for many women of color to vote. So that was a missed opportunity, and we didn't want to make that mistake again. So as we turned our attention to gerrymandering and making a gerrymandering infographic, we decided to still sort of cover the basics like we always would, but also call attention to the way in which gerrymandering can impact the representation of communities of color. And you'll notice my big can there, because we didn't put that word in initially, and that was my mistake. I'm sort of, when it comes to the content of our resources, the buck stops at me. I should have put that word in there, can or might, and I didn't. So we're going back to our designer to fix it and to add that word. But there's no denying the fact that historically gerrymandering, even when done strictly for partisan purposes, even when the intention is not to minimize the representation of communities of color, sometimes the impact is just that, even if it's not the intention. And so we were trying to highlight that. I missed that one word that was pretty darn important, so we're going to go back and add it. So that's our new gerrymandering. Otherwise, I'm quite proud of it. We worked really, really hard, and despite that, still missed a word. But it's still a really great resource. We have our running for president, so now I'm getting back on track, no pun intended, to our topic here, which is the 2020 election. So here's a great infographic just sort of in one place showing the process for running for president and equating it to sort of running a race. We have another one coming up on public opinion polling. So that'll come out. It's in the designer's hands right now, so we should be publishing this by next week. It's about the role of public opinion polls. And so after 2016, people sort of assume that like polls are worthless and they don't tell you anything. And I think that's because so many folks think of them as a crystal ball, like a poll is going to tell you the future. And it's not. It's just one data point in a prediction about that. It's one data point that can inform a prediction about the future. So we're gonna cover that and also show sort of how sampling works, illustrate the sampling process by funneling down from like the whole country to sample size to what that tells the media and candidates and pollsters. And just today, we decided we're going to make one more infographic. We got some requests from a broad swath of people on the left, on the right, and everyone in between, asking us to make an infographic about the transition of power. So we will be doing that and cranking that out as quickly as possible. And you can see how this is how, the sort of shaky ground that we're on as we try to do this in a nonpartisan way, a way that's really fair. But we found that even we were struggling to explain sort of like, where does that come from? It's not like, oh, here's this one place that tells you about transition of power. Here's where it says it's a mixture of history and norms and culture, and yes, constitutional provisions. And we're going to try to illustrate how those things all come together to create what we have in our country as a transition, as a culture of a peaceful transition of power. One last thing I want to say about our infographics is that they all come with a teacher guide. So yes, these can be printed out and they make beautiful classroom art. They also, as you can see, show quite lovely on a screen. But we also want them to be teaching tools. So in some cases, we've created corresponding Webquests. In some cases, we've created Google slide decks. In some cases, like in gerrymandering, we connect to a mini lesson. And they all have guides to sort of offer some suggestions for how to teach with the infographic. And that's that. So now I want to pivot to really sort of focusing more on teaching that presidential election. And I'm going to just stay on these slides for a couple more minutes, and then I think I'm going to bounce to the site to sort of walk through some of these things. So another resource that is new and I'm really excited about and really proud of is our Student Power Elections resource. So it occurred to me, we were talking to some funders, we were upgrading our game, Cast Your Vote. So plug for Cast Your Vote, it has been updated. Talk more about that in a second. But we wanted, and they wanted us to create additional resources to sort of wrap around the game. And so we created an extension pack. So there's all, slides, there's pre-activities, all that jazz to teach around the game. And then we're like, what else can we do? And it occurred to me that we spend so much time, especially in election year, focusing on voting. And the vast majority of our kids can't vote. They're either not old enough, and even when they are of age, will not be eligible for other reasons. So I thought, why don't we create a resource that sort of focuses on what the student can do now? And that's what inspired the Student Power Elections resource. And I want you to notice on the screen right now, it says, think about sharing this resource with students, use this link. We created a sort of easy bit.ly link so that you can share it directly with students and they don't have to have that teacher account to download it. Because as some of you know, in order to download our lesson plans, you have to have that free teacher account. And we wanted this to be a direct, accessible resource for kids. So we created this link so you can do just that. You can use that link. You don't have to be registered, and your students can use it as well. So there it is. So let me just show you sort of what's in it, a quick lay of the land here. There's 6 sections, and you'll notice that the first half does sort of focus on voting. Again, because we know the importance of teaching voting. Again, 40% more likely. Students are 40% more likely to vote when they turn 18 if they're taught about elections and voting, if they're taught how to vote. So we really focus on the practical, registering to vote, what's on the ballot, and how do you actually vote, sort of trying to demystify it. We did a webinar for your students, and one of the questions, this was a week and a half ago, I guess, and one of the questions was, is it hard to vote? And the answer is no. And if you know how to do it, like, it's super easy. I mean, it might be hard to do the research to know who you should vote for, but in terms of actually showing up and voting, it's not hard. But if you know how it works in your state. So the other cool thing about this resource is, even though it's not trying to be about federalism, it absolutely teaches about federalism. As you go through these first 3 sections, it's always like, well, depending on which state you live in, and we prompt the student to do that research, go to their Secretary of State, go to their election supervisor's website, and figure out what are the rules for registering, for voting early, voting by mail. Our Constitution left elections up to the states, which means we have 50 different systems, 50 different sets of rules, and it really does matter. I recently learned this. This is my first presidential election voting as a resident of Georgia. I lived in Florida my entire life, so it was like, what do I do? Luckily, Florida and Georgia are very similar. You can do it when you get a driver. You can register when you get a driver's license. You can vote by mail, all those things. So I'm doing just that. But anyways, after voting, we move on to getting informed, getting involved, and protesting. What's cool about this resource, and what I'd like to share with you, is that it was informed from start to finish by a group of young people, students from our Equity Youth Fellowship, students from across the country, from different demographic backgrounds. We talked to them before we ever got started. We talked to them midway. We talked to them again, and we got their feedback. And the coolest piece of feedback we got from them, well, one is that, there's this assumption that, like, kids don't care. And they're like, that's not true. We care. We just don't, like, we're not taught how to do this stuff. So what do you expect from us? Like, yep, you're right. And that's not their fault. It's our fault. And then the other thing they shared with us is that, they really wanted to know more about protesting and or demonstrating. And I think we were always going to include that section, but we were doing so very cautiously because we're educators and we care about the safety of our students more than anything else. And so the idea of, like, coming across as encouraging protesting, especially if that could, lead to a violent confrontation, it's not something that we want to be complicit in sort of sending kids out to do, at least not without giving them the proper information and reflection opportunities beforehand. So when we first wrote that protesting section, we got some feedback from students, and they're like, it kind of sounds like you're discouraging it. And we're like, we don't want to take a stance one way or another. It's absolutely one avenue, one pathway of citizen expression. So try to get that wording just right so that, kids know why they're protesting, they know how to do it safely, they make a plan, and then perhaps reflect upon the experience afterwards. So that's all in there. And I'm just going to scroll through some of the slides so you can see, again, these are the 6 sections of the Student Power Elections resource. Let's click on Get Informed. So you can see we sort of start off with a really brief reading. All of these are just a couple of pages. We keep it short. We go through some important topics. I like to focus on Get Informed because I think it is the sort of acme of civic expression. We think of like voting as like the number one behavior and activity, which makes sense because it's something you have to like intentionally do. You have to show up to vote or request that ballot and fill it out, put it in the mailbox. But staying informed, you know, an election only happens every so often. A presidential election only happens every 4 years. But you can be informed every day. And more, as we as social studies educators know, being informed takes a little bit more effort than it used to. We have more access to information, but that information is not reliable like it used to be. So going through some of those terms, some of those ideas, I don't know the statistic about teaching news literacy skills. All I know is that it works, that if you focus on teaching it, kids are more likely to do it. You're sort of cultivating this don't be a sucker disposition. You're saying, hey, do the work, make sure you're not sharing something that's not true. You don't want to be duped, right? So that's, we know that if you spend the time to teach that, if you teach your students nothing else, teach them lateral reading, teach them to open up a new browser tab and Google whatever it is the meme says or the article says before they hit share, go and see what that is. All right, so that's all about getting informed. I just wanted to show this one so you can see that every section in the 6-section student power guide has this rewind and reflect portion. So again, we want students to be thinking about this, reflecting on what they learned before moving on. So there we are, there's ballot breakdown, there's actually voting, and that's that. So I promised I would talk about our games. So our 2 elections related games, the ones that are like really specifically about elections, are Cast Your Vote and Win the White House. So Cast Your Vote really quickly, newly updated. You can play in English or in Spanish. There's a full extension pack with activities before, during, after included. This game is unique in that we very specifically decided to focus on local elections. We know that when people vote in national elections, it's very easy to just show up. And if you're a Democrat, to just go down and vote for everyone that has DEM next to their name. And conversely, if you're a Republican, just go down and vote for everyone with REP. By the way, that's not how people used to vote. That's really a sort of, it's something that we've sort of like evolved into over time where people vote a straight party ticket, but it doesn't have to be that way. And in local elections, it's typically not. A lot of local seats are nonpartisan seats. There's no political affiliation. So you really have to know who you vote for. And the way this game starts off is they give you a ballot and you have no idea who any of these names are, any of these initiatives. And it's like, okay, good news, you've got time till election day. Let's do the work to educate ourselves so that we're ready to vote. So it's all about how you go about preparing to vote in a local election. Again, we're teaching kids how to vote so that they'll be more likely to vote. So this is a great game. It's a really sort of safe game from a partisan perspective. There's no major controversial issues embedded in the game. And again, it's focusing on the local. That does make it different from our most popular game during an election year, which is Win the White House. So what you need to know about Win the White House is that we updated it in 2016 for the 2016 election. We updated it again this year for the 2020 election. It has an art refresh. It has some new features. Again, you can play in Spanish. We translated it into Spanish. And we upgraded all of the issues, the political issues. Now, this is where we're on that shaky ground again. And I won't say we've gotten ourselves in trouble, but we've definitely exposed ourselves to some pushback and some criticism. And we get it from the left and the right, which I guess means we're doing something right, because a liberal person will be like, you guys must be a bunch of Republicans over there. It says this. And then, you know, a more liberal person says the exact opposite. And it's like, we're just trying to help kids understand how to pay attention to politics and what these issues are. So I give you my word that it's as balanced as it could possibly be. There's 3 different levels, middle, elementary, middle, and high school. That's really just about unlocking different issues. There's a few different political issues in the high school version that we don't put in the elementary version, just so that no one's sort of, you know, expected to talk about family planning in a 2nd grade class if they weren't expecting to have that conversation. That's just one sort of extreme example. You pick your party, you win your nomination, and then you play that electoral map. And that's what I love about Win the White House, is that it teaches kids about the Electoral College without having to teach kids about the Electoral College. The beauty of the American system, and also the most exasperating part of the American system, is that we have complicated things so much. Thank you, founders. The Electoral College, federalism, I mean, these are abstract, they're conceptual, they're so hard to teach. And this game takes one of those and just makes it really fun. And my advice to you, if you haven't already done so, if you want to use this game, play it yourself, play a couple of times, get a high score. If you want to cheat and you want to just like find out from us like what the high scores are, just email support. I don't know the number off the top of my head. Joe might know. Just ask us what that number is and we'll just tell you. And you'll be like, all right, kids, here's the number to beat. Here's what I got. And create a class leaderboard. And you can do this if you're teaching virtually, hybrid, or in person. And what you'll find is that kids are super motivated to beat you, and they will keep beating you until they can show you that certificate that they got a higher score than you did, or than the next kid in the class. So it's a really great way to motivate kids to play. This is one of those games that we can see from our metrics that like a bunch of kids are playing it like at 10 a.m. Like, okay, they're at school, the teacher assigned it. And then in that same that same geographic location, there's this huge spike at 6, 7, and 8 o'clock because the kids are going home and playing again. So the game's really replayable, it's really fun, and teaches all about that Electoral College. Just want to quickly make a point that all of our games can be downloaded onto devices, and once they've been downloaded as free apps, you don't need an internet connection to play this. So if any of your students are in situations where you can sort of upload the apps, whether on Chromebooks or tablets, then if they take those devices home, they don't have to have internet access. These are the games that we've recently upgraded. You can thank Adobe. We originally built all of our games using Flash technology. And as many of you know, Flash technology is going away. So we were in a mad dash to spend millions of dollars to upgrade all of our games. And we are fortunate to be able to raise that money and do it for most of them. So all these games have been upgraded into a new gaming platform, which makes no difference to me. What matters to me is that they've been refreshed, they've been updated, they've been translated into Spanish, they have new features. That's what matters, and that's really exciting for us. If you don't already know, we are synced with Google Classroom and with Clever. Clever is just a single sign-on solution. If you know what it is, you know what it is. If you don't worry about it. But a lot of you know what Google Classroom is. We're trying really hard to stay up with it, stay as current as we can. We're a nonprofit. We raise every dollar every year. So when things shift, we've got to fundraise before we can do the work. But we've really tried hard to make things as accessible as possible during this otherwise really challenging time to be a teacher. And if you don't know, we do have this remote learning toolkit. These are just resources that are sort of optimized for at-home learning or virtual learning. So just want to make sure you are aware of that. So with that, I'm going to stop share so I can switch some screens, and also take questions or concerns, or sort of pull up things that anyone wants to see. Let me pull up a new browser tab that doesn't have 8,000 tabs open.
Emma, there was a question about the infographics you showed earlier. Is that something a teacher can load into like a student's own notebook? That's not a copyright issue for them to use it in that manner, is that?
Nope. So as long as you're not like, actually, no. I mean, really, most of our stuff falls under fair use. The only time where we're gonna be like, whoa, is if you're hosting it in your LMS so your kids can access it, like that's fine. If you like create like, if Joe created like a website that happened to be called joesmitchsocialstudies.com, and he listed all of our PDFs there, we'd be like, Joe, knock it off. Like, send people to our website to download them. But no, to answer that question, you can absolutely do that. Let me open up my here we are, Google Chrome. Share. Okay. So as promised, here is iCivics.org. I'm going to click on visit our elections headquarters so you can see all this. In case anyone's wondering, 20 days, 9 hours, 17 minutes, and 14, 13, 12 seconds until the election. And we can all pray that it will actually be over on that day, regardless of the outcome. Okay, so there's the ticker. Like I said, this is sort of one-stop shopping. So this will bring you right to our Student Power Elections resource. Students Power. I don't think that's right. I think I got to fix that. We're featuring resources because of the vice presidential debate last week. We are featuring our mini lesson on the vice presidency. We really sort of felt guilty about encouraging folks to teach the election. And I was on social media the night of the presidential election, and I could see the regret of so many social studies teachers. I can't believe I told my kids to watch this. And there's me at home going, I can't believe I told our teachers to tell their kids to watch this. We're so sorry. But there you go. There's that climate we live in. Oh, wanted to let you know that we created a family guide. So this is another one of those ways to not just communicate with parents that you're going to be teaching about the election, but also to invite them in as well. So I always share that my first political memory as a child was from the 1992 election. I was watching the returns come in with my dad in my childhood home living room. And I couldn't understand why that really rich guy from Texas with big ears was getting a lot of votes, but not a single electoral college vote. And so my father had to try to explain to me how the US electoral process worked. And you can imagine that was pretty tough for him to do. So we created a family guide to support parents in doing that. So again, not just telling parents, hey, this is what we're doing in the classroom, but also like, hey, ask your kid about what they're learning in my classroom on this topic. And hey, here's a guide if you'd like to use it to talk about the election with your kids. Here are all of our elections related games. Again, win the White House and cast your vote for obvious reason. We include executive command because that's the top of the ticket is for the presidency. And then newsfeed defenders, because again, staying informed requires that we know how to consume media. And then moving on down here, here's some other relevant lesson plans that we have. And you can view more. Here's our candidates guide. This is kind of fun. Let me open this up really quickly. Doop, doop, doop. Oh, I'm not logged in. See, I didn't even follow my own advice. All right, download, candidate bios. Doop, doop. So we've got the 4 biggest sort of party candidates. And then we've got, for all of them, we've got this grid showing, what their slogan is, their education, professional experience, et cetera, just to give that guide. And again, sort of instilling in students this disposition to like do the work to research candidates and not just say, oh, well, my parents are voting for so-and-so, so I support that person, or everyone in my community, I see more signs for this person, so they must be the best. That, teaching them some other strategies for doing that work. All the infographics are here. And when you go to their individual pages, you'll find those resources that go along with them. So for instance, with the census one, you'll see we have a lesson plan to go along with it. And then when you go to that lesson plan, you'll see that we offer one-to-one classroom PDF versions for that. So student docs that are fillable. So you can, upload those to Google Classroom or whatever your LMS is. Students can fill them out and then you turn them in. Oh, so here's just upcoming, here's Webquest. We have Webquest too. Nice resource if you're teaching virtually or hybrid. And then we've just been down here, just any articles we're writing, any blog posts, any future trainings we're doing, or any past trainings, you would have the link to the videos. And those are all down here. So we've been busy, and so have you. Being a social studies teacher, during an election year is kind of like, I guess, being an accountant during tax season. It's busy season for us. I know for you, it's sort of all you can do to get through the day. I'm shocked when people show up to trainings right now because I know how hard you're working. I know you're burning the candle at both ends and it's just exhausting. So the fact that you're taking the time for PD is, I just hats off to you. I don't even know what to say. It's just such a hard year to be a teacher and particularly a social studies teacher. But I, welcome any additional comments, questions, concerns. I like to help.
There's a question, is there a list of vocabulary words somewhere for particular activities? I've gone through games and activities beforehand and taught key ideas. I wasn't sure if I was missing something.
So with the games, what we've done is we've embedded the glossaries in the game. So as the kids are playing the game, it'll, a word will be like in blue and you can click on it and it's right there. What we've done with some of the games is we've created these like guides that go with them. So for instance, let me go to Win the White House, and this might take me right to the game page, not the teacher page. Let me see. Oh, no. So if you click download teacher resources, you'll see we have this issue guide in English and Spanish. So I'm going to click on that and just show how for all the issues in Win the White House, there are these sort of illustrated guides about what they stand for on the Democratic Party and on the Republican Party. And we use the actual artwork from the games so that students can recognize it when they see it in the game. And as you can see, it's in Spanish as well, and it looks absolutely the same. If you were to put the Spanish version down on a kid's desk, they couldn't tell the difference, unless they really read that it was in a different language. They look exactly the same. Let me pull up, let's see, the extension pack, see if we go through vocabulary. As we've given more attention to supporting English language learners, we have been focusing more on vocabulary because, as you anticipate, the academic vocabulary of our discipline is so complex. I'm trying to find not this, but the actual PowerPoint. Why am I not finding it? So I know in some of the Google slides that, oh, here we go. Here's glossary of game terms. So I think the new sort of iCivics approach is to include these glossaries for each new extension pack we make for our games. But if you're about to teach a topic and you're wondering if there's a glossary out there and you're not seeing it, just email support and they'll get back to you right away, and say, here it is, or so sorry. But that's the kind of thing that we hear and we track. So if we see like, hey, we've gotten a few requests for X, our support team brings that to our curriculum call and we're like, all right, maybe we should create that. People are asking for it. And if 5 people are asking for it, that means like 5,000 people want it. It's just those are the 5 people who took the time to ask. So if there's ever a resource that you think would really help support your practice or make our resources more usable, we want to know. Oh, and here's that family guide I was talking about, by the way. And it's also, I don't know how many of you have native Spanish speaking ELLs, but if you do, or if their parents speak Spanish in the home, we more and more are trying to provide that option. And I wish we provided every language. It's just that translation is cost prohibitive. And as a nonprofit, to do it well, which is the only way we're willing to do it, it costs so much money. So right now we're trying to get everything into Spanish, and then we'll continue to fundraise to be able to do it in additional languages. So this is really geared at parents, at families, at adults, the adults at home, as I like to say. Any other questions, concerns?
Any questions for Emma? Here's your opportunity. She won't like the word expert, or she didn't like the word expert, but this is your opportunity to ask questions of the expert.
Like you, my expertise is really just couched in my passion for the topic. I love it so much, and so I focus on it so much, and that's, I guess, how you develop some knowledge and expertise around it.
All right. Well, Emma, we will give you the official thank you and goodbye. So on behalf of all of our participants today and myself and anybody who's watching this recording down the road, thank you for spending an hour with us today.